CCKC and now Kalamazoo. It is featuring the Kalamazoo County Defender's Office. And also our panelist for this evening is going to be Jeff Fry. He's going to be our community member on the panel. So this is going over R&O charges in an educational format. Next slide.
Next slide.
The purpose. So while we are all here, we're here to educate the community about resisting and obstructing charges under Michigan law, clarify how these charges commonly occur, and empower individuals with the knowledge and tools to prevent unnecessary legal consequences. The problem that we're facing, not only here in Kalamazoo County, but also statewide and nationwide right now, is that too many individuals in our community are being charged with R&Os without fully understanding the actions that can lead to this felony charge. A lack of public awareness and legal education contributes to avoidable arrest, long-term consequences, and distrust between community members and law enforcement. Desired outcome. These are the things that we are hoping to achieve out of not only this event this evening, but other things that we have surrounding R&O charges going on in Kalamazoo County this summer. So we would like to see a more informed community where individuals understand how to avoid R&O charges, safely navigate interactions with law enforcement, and protect themselves from unnecessary legal consequences. Ultimately, we aim to reduce the number of R&O charges in our community here in Kalamazoo County, build trust in education, such as events like these, and promote safer and more respectful engagements between residents and the justice system. So we're going to do an icebreaker. So with this icebreaker, I'm going to need you guys' help. So it's called Resist or Comply, and what would you do? The purpose is to present you guys with real life, urgent situations. We know that usually people who are getting an R&O charge, they have to think quick on their feet, right? And so it's not something that you're expecting to happen, so it's split second decisions. And so we're going to help you guys distinguish between perceived resistance and legal definitions. So our lawyers over here from KCPI, they are going to help us look at it from a legal aspect as well. And this should help set the tone for later for the panel, emphasizing education, safety, and empowerment, and not shame or fear. So I'm going to be walking around a little bit. So scenario one. Thank you. Scenario one, you're pulled over at night, the officer asks for your ID, but you hesitate and you ask, why was I stopped? You don't reach for anything, the officer repeats the request more firmly. So to community members, is this resisting? Why or why not? If you would like to answer, raise your hand.
No, it's not resisting. You have the right to ask the question as far as why you were stopped.
Anybody else would like to?
I agree, it's not resisting.
But why?
Because you have to, yeah, I don't know why I was stopped.
Ask for the ID.
And we have one more, and then we're going to jump to our next question.
No, because you haven't been charged with anything.
Okay. And so now for our lawyers, how would you respond in a way that protects your rights but avoids legal risk in this scenario? Yes.
I'm Mark Burr. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Mark Burr from KDI. So a couple of things. I would believe that the officer should tell you why they're being pulled over. Give your ID. Give your ID. Don't say anything. Don't try to. You don't necessarily have to answer any other questions, but give your ID because there's a requirement when you're driving a car that you have to provide ID when they ask for it. Now, there's other things that subsequently might happen if they subsequently charge you for an R&O. Your attorneys, perhaps counsel defender, could look into circumstances surrounding the stop, why, if the stop was justified, things like that. That's really not your job at the time. I mean, unfortunately, your job at the time is to provide the ID. And, yeah, I wish it was different, but that's what it is.
So just to clarify, legally, if you are driving a vehicle, and you are asked for your ID by law enforcement, you must give them your ID based upon the law that we currently have in Michigan.
Yeah.
Next scenario. Oh, I'm sorry, you had a question. Y'all don't have my glasses on, so this may be a little rough. I'm sorry.
If I'm homeless and I'm down at a homeless shelter and I'm just checking it and they ask me for my ID, am I entitled to give my ID?
So actually, that's a much different question. We actually had a really interesting case come through our thing, and we challenged it, and we won it in the Court of Appeals. That no, Michigan does not require, if they don't have reasonable suspicion or probable cause that you committed a crime, you do not have to give an ID when you're not driving. And this also often happens with our community with trespass cases. They say, we're going to trespass you from somewhere. What you just do is say, okay, I'm going to leave. But you don't have to give an ID at that situation. When you're walking down the street, you don't have to give an ID unless they articulate a reason for for the stop that involves criminal activity.
What happens when they pop on you and make you give your ID and take you to jail?
Then you come and we kick their butts. Right?
The part that's tough about this is that, especially in scenario one, I don't think that's R&O yet. I think the problem is if it turns into 5 or 6 times how long the stop is, then they might articulate a different kind of charge. The other part too is oftentimes officers are wrong, but I don't believe you're ever going to win a fight with an officer on the street. The reality is they have the power under our system, and so acting out or trying to act out with them is only going to increase the likelihood of charges. I will let a shot take grab. There's lots of things. So.
My question is, what if you're a passenger in the car and they ask for your ID, do you have to give it?
So there's a couple things that might occur here. And so I would say the best thing to do is to give your ID and just not talk to the officer, right? You're not, so many times we have issues that arise because somebody thinks they can talk themselves out of a situation. And sometimes we have issues arise because somebody's like, well, I don't have to give you something, right? And that's kind of what we're doing a project about RNOs, and it's focusing a lot of attention on officer actions. We can talk about that later. But you can avoid a lot of problems by just saying, okay, here's my ID. If you don't have your ID, though, that's not a cause for a problem, right? But it makes things a lot easier is to give your ID and just say, no, I'm not talking to you. Generally.
And that was my question in regards to a lot of our community do not have a legal ID. So whether they're a passenger in a car or walking down the street and they don't have an ID, how should this situation go?
In that part, I think you just have to be honest and say, I don't have an ID. You give them their actual name and they'll be able to move forward from there. So, sadly, we run into a lot of people give them a different name or something like that. And the city police, at least, have a couple options. They have an ordinance for obstruction or disguise, which is misdemeanor. Sadly, the toughest part about RNOs is that they're, as originally charged, are normally felonies, and that's the part that is, I think, the worst part about the whole law is that they start off as a 2-year felony, they can be enhanced if an officer is injured, and our local prosecutor sometimes charges them as a misdemeanor, but even that misdemeanor on your criminal record looks and plays like a felony. So it's just, if there's one law that I could change by making a law, it would be reducing RNOs from being felonies.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to scenario 2. This is a youth-based question. You're at a community event when police suddenly approach and begin questioning you about a nearby disturbance. You're confused and scared. You take out your phone to call your mom. An officer tells you to put your phone away and keep your hands visible. You hesitate and say, I'm just calling my mom, but you continue to dial and you start to walk away and the officer says stop and you do not. Could this be interpreted as resisting or obstructing? Why or why not community?
I would say yes, this is resisting and obstructing because he gave a command and he didn't obey.
Anyone else?
And when he walked away, that added on it as well.
So to our lawyers, what are your rights in this moment?
So if officers are investigating what they believe to be a crime, they can question people around them that might be witnesses. My recommendation would be to say, I don't know anything, and say, and then ask, am I free to go? That would be my recommendation. But unfortunately, in this situation, like walking away when they're discussing, if they believe that there's a disturbance, the disturbance is kind of questionable here. If it's not a disturbance that involves a crime or a report of a crime, that's maybe a little bit different. But rather than parse that out, if an officer comes up and says, hey, did you see this? Just answer them and say, no. Like seriously, no. I didn't see anything. I mean, and I know you people are confused or stuff like that. I would just say, obviously officers are there to do their job and things happen and you might see a horrible incident and you want to talk to an officer. But if you don't want to talk to an officer, rather than walk away, just say, I didn't see anything, I have nothing to say. Or just say, I have nothing to say. And then say, am I free to leave?
So this is for community members or lawyers. How could this situation be handled differently to stay safe and avoid escalation while still trying to get help? What would be a good alternative for the youth in this moment? How could this situation be handled differently to stay safe and avoid escalation while still trying to get help? The youth in the scenario wanted to call their parents, and the officer is telling them to put their phone away, but they're still scared and they're still saying, I want to call my mom, and they start to walk away. What other options could they have done instead?
Hello. Just being a parent as well as being a community member, I would tell my child as well as my family members to comply with the officers and to do what's right. If the police officers tell you, to resist or put your hands up, just listen to the orders that is being given and instructed. Because as an officer standpoint, or anyone that have enforcement power, they would basically feel like you're having a weapon or anything like that. So just to comply with the instructions that's being given.
So my question is going to be to the attorneys. If you have a youth that is underage, how far can an officer question him? Because when he's saying he wants to call his mom.
Sadly, they have some leeway, especially in a scene like that, to do some inquiring about things. My advice here would be, if you are wanting to talk to your mother or that kind of stuff, and you're being told to do that, I would still dial the number even if I put the phone in my pocket so that the mother could hear what was going on and be able to at least deduce from what was going on, that the child was having an interaction with law enforcement. I don't know if they would have had like one of those apps that showed where their child was on their phone and they could go there right away and be there to be supportive. But it's one of those situations, again, I think that the law is changing to realize that children should be treated differently. The sad part is that it's a slow change in evolution. I sit on a committee with the state bar where we're trying to get the law enforcement not to be able to lie to children, and that any confession that comes out of a lie will be excluded. Obviously, we support that at Kalamazoo Defender. The committee I'm on supported it, but the Prosecutors Association of Michigan is vehemently against it. So it's something that's out there as a bill that they're trying to pass into law. But right now, children, although they are protected in some ways, are still exposed. But the reality is, though, an article like this to a juvenile would probably not be something handled with the adult system. The reality is the juvenile system still has some deficiencies from our perspective, and we're hoping that within the next year or two that they will have a indigent defense office to help represent juveniles, because we worry about them and protecting their rights as well. But this is a situation where I think the walking away makes it a little bit different. So.
And our last community question.
Matt, you talked about a bill, it's in progress. Can you share that information with us so we can write to our legislators?
On which one?
You just said
Regarding juvenile justice reform?
Yeah.
Yes, I will make sure that I get that information. I don't remember the House bill. Yeah, I apologize. It was reintroduced last year. So 2 years ago, they redid all of juvenile justice, except for the part that would have funded defenders' offices like Kalamazoo Defender. So they did a lot of work on changing this, but they didn't fund it. So it was up to be passed at the end of last year's lame duck session. It never got passed. It's been reintroduced. The honest part is that it's going to cost millions and millions of dollars. And so in this legislature, I'm not sure kind of what its fate is. But it's necessary because the thing that hurts our heart at Kalamazoo Defender is we look at a lot of these juveniles, and I believe everybody in here agrees that the juvenile is the least culpable person in our society for committing a wrong act. They're the least responsible. But I can tell you, especially on the designated juvenile cases that we do represent on, they get some of the harshest sentences, and it's because I think they're not exposed to the same level of rigor or lawyering that we're used to at Kalamazoo Defender. We just have a lot of power in our office because of the size and number of staff that we have.
I just wanted to make this comment. You stated that if the police told somebody to put the kid to put their phone away, that you probably would have them dial it anyway and do it. And I'm saying absolutely not. As a mother of a black man that was once a black boy, to have taken that risk, I have to be concerned that the police may shoot him. And that might work for a white young man, but definitely, absolutely not as a black man. They need to know that they need to comply. My whole teaching of my son was to come home. You comply with what they tell you to do, live to fight another day, because I'll go back down there with you, so be very careful on making that suggestion or recommendation, because I totally disagree.
Well, and again, I appreciate that counsel, and more, I guess, without knowing all of the situations, if there's a way, just as technology has changed, where you can do it in a way that isn't going to cause extra, danger. But absolutely, I understand that the way that law enforcement interacts, especially African American males, especially children, is different. I fully support what you were saying there, and hopefully there'll be somebody nearby that can assist. But it's really difficult. I don't object to your critique of my answers.
So that goes into our next question, which was, what role does fear play in how people respond to police, and how should officers take that into account? Community?
Fear plays a major role in the actions when you're in front of an officer, especially in the Black community.
Hey y'all, fear might play a big part in like trauma coming from a young man that happened to probably his friends or something, so they might pull the camera out. And I've been a victim to it where we pull the camera out and they take my phone from me and turn the video off, and they shouldn't be able to do that. I should be able to protect myself with the video to be able to show my mom when I get home if what they did and how I handled myself in the situation.
I'll say as far as fear, a lot of times people can get fidgety because they're nervous. The nervousness comes from how we as a Black community are treated when we are pulled over. And the question that I was going to ask as well, because we should be able to videotape, we should be able to continue, and a lot of times if it's an officer that don't want you to continue, usually because they're going to be doing something wrong and don't want to be caught on video. Even when you get pulled over, you'll see where you can just put your ID up to the window. Will that suffice? Because sometimes just keeping the window cracked and putting the information up there, as long as they can read it, are we able to get away with that in Kalamazoo?
I would say honestly, I think that putting your ID up to the window is appropriate. The problem is whether or not they're going to evaluate it as appropriate and, continue to escalate or not, right? So if they de-escalate, I think it is enough. I think the problem is if they ask you to do something in addition to that. And the reality is, I think the question that is put up there is interesting about fear. The problem is the people that have power in the situation, the officers, I think a lot of times they act out of fear. And I don't think it's a justified fear. I think it's a stereotypical fear, that kind of stuff. And I think that the reality is that the officers need a lot more training on how to interact with people and not make bad judgments based on that. And so, yes, I think that anybody, I can tell you anybody, even me when I have interactions with law enforcement, anticipate them trying to pull some kind of shenanigans. It's sad that that's the way that it's become, but I think that it is. And that is with all the privilege that I have as being a white male and stuff. And so I think fear is a huge part. But the reality is, law enforcement, and this was originally the goal of community policing, was to get people that knew the community so they didn't act out of fear. But all it did was bring more harsh policing to communities. And that was the sad part of how that turned out.
Thank you. We do have to move on to our panel discussion just so we can keep on time, but there are sticky notes on your tables. If you do have any more questions related to any of these two topics that we just shared or just general questions about the topic that we just covered, please write it down and we'll make sure that we get those answered for you. And if you sign up, we have your emails and we'll be able to send that out to everyone and share it. Jumping into our panel discussion this evening, we have Matt Wade from KCDI, Mark Brewer from KCDI, sorry Mark, Ellen Christie from KCDI, and Jeff Fry, who is our community member for this evening. So starting off with understanding the law, what legally constitutes resisting or obstructing an officer? And this is questions for the panel.
So, unfortunately, a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, we often have people come in and they're like, I didn't assault an officer, right? Unfortunately, refusing a single command could be the source of a resisting and obstructing charge. And we see that often. Now, it could be a classic situation where you're fighting an officer. It's an assault. Or it could be a situation where they say, put your hand behind your back, and you refuse to put your hand behind your back. It could be a situation where you run away. Unfortunately, what's the big thing we're looking at, why we're focusing on this, is that it gives so much power to the police. So much power to the police, and it's a felony. It's not a felony everywhere else, but it's a felony here, and it's so difficult. And we can talk more about this later, but it's great that we have this forum to talk about what people can do to not have on our nose, But in reality, we have to change what the police do. And that's really what we're doing. That's really what we're trying to do here. Like, we have a project that we're working on, and this is a part of it. But really, like the frustration that the community feels, and saying like, there's anything I do could be an R&O, which is pretty close. I mean, we have to change that. So, if you have a bad interaction with the police, there's a chance, a very good chance, that there's somewhere in there they can find an R&O. And that's really scary, but it is. It's refusing commands and things like that. Go ahead.
So some of the examples that we pulled for this evening was physical resistance, which is physically struggling with an officer during an arrest, obstruction, refusing to comply with lawful commands, lying to officers or hiding evidence, and endangering, which means actions that put an officer at risk or harm. How do these charges differ between jurisdictions? And we just kind of talked about that, so we're going to jump to the next question. Are there common misconceptions about what actions can lead to these charges?
I think the answer on that is yes. And just so, I think we were just kind of highlighting that everybody knows it is R&O, that's the common language, but it includes all the words assaults, batters, wounds, resists, obstructs, opposes, or endangers. So, and those are just common definitions that they pull out of the dictionary. So, if you think about what that means, and you end up with some very different kind of answers. The other part that I think is really important for everyone to understand about the process is that in the prosecutor's office here, they have 20-some attorneys, and the lion's share of them that have been there for at least 6 months to a year, at some point during their time, whether it's weekly or monthly, serve as a charging attorney. So that means that they review cases that come in, and they make decisions on what to charge and what not to charge. And my honest feeling about this is that there are some people that have been in the system long enough and they know what a real R&O looks like and they don't charge nonsense. But there are others, because the prosecutor's office is so connected to law enforcement, that they will authorize stuff that we just look at and simply what we're talking about. And the reality is we have different feelings about R&Os from law enforcement officers. Some of them, I think, use it to justify their actions. I remember one who was very honest with me one day. It was the 2-year felony R&O is the regular R&O. If the officer is injured during that, it becomes a 4-year felony. And in the case that I had with the officer that I was dealing with, he was running after somebody, tripped, fell, and injured himself. But because that was connected to chasing somebody on an R&O, there was somebody that wanted to charge that as R&O causing injury, right? Because but for the person running away, the officer would have got hurt. And that officer said to me, there's no way I'm going on the stand and going to sit there and take an R&O causing injury because I tripped and fell. Like that is, so I want to make sure that we understand there are officers out there that will say, look, this is not an R&O. The reality is this crime has grown a lot since the 90s and on. Before that, this was something that oftentimes was settled on the street when somebody tackled somebody extra hard and that kind of stuff. The reality is that it's changed. It's changed in some ways very horribly.
So how does intent, Jeff?
No, I was going to touch on that due to the simple fact that a lot of times we focus on what the officer would have. A lot of times in our community, they're just writing things up without actually putting in a picture of actually what happened. It's different when it's on paper. Because when you're living in these communities and they're not just pulling you over. But on paper they just pulled you over and this is what happened. No, when they actually pull you over, it's 5 or 6 of them. So when it's 5 or 6 of them, it automatically makes a person defensive. You know, that's just human nature. It's like if you're being bullied. So we have to understand like what type of reaction you're gonna get when you're bullying somebody. When that you're looking like when you're doing something right or when you're not. So this is how they pull up in our communities. Some of them be marked cars, some of them not. Some of them wear masks, some of them not. So a lot of times you be like, how can you differentiate who is who? You know, so when they're rushing our kids, when they're jumping out at them, how do they actually know that this is the police when they're masked on? When they're actually ones running. We got people that just ride around in cars now since COVID that they ride around with masks on. It's not a crime no more. So the police blend in with the same young guys that actually ride around with masks on. So how can you differentiate who's is who when everybody will jump out? That's the same way they jump out when they finish shooting. So the police do the same thing. How can you? What happens? What they supposed to do? They're supposed to run away from it. But they're not putting that on paperwork. So it makes it easy for them to charge you with whatever they want to charge you with. Because they're not going to tell you how they actually came and how they actually scared y'all into being that way.
How does intent factor into being charged with resisting or obstructing?
You don't have to intend to resist or obstruct. There's a lot of times where somebody, the previous experiences people talk about, I just want to talk to my mom, I don't know what's going on here. You don't have to intend at all to do that. I mean, it's, I would just say like, so, in reality, that's the situation is oftentimes, almost, I would say, much more than half of our cases, our clients are not in any way trying to mess with the officer, and they still get caught. Partly because they don't know what it means, resisting obstructing. Part of it is because they're scared. A big part of it is they're scared. Part of it is because officers exacerbate situations sometimes. They make it worse. You talk about them rolling up on you, and we see over and over again where officers lay hands on people, touch them, without telling them they're going to touch them, and maybe lay hands on them without even having a reason to arrest them. There's a feeling amongst many police officers that they can touch, especially young black men, whenever they want to. And that's not acceptable behavior. But here's the thing, if an officer touches Matt like this, and Matt knocks his hand away, that's resisting obstructing an officer. So that's one of the things. So it's a long-winded answer is like most of our clients don't intend to resist officers. They get discharged.
So you jumped right into our next question, which was who is most frequently impacted by resisting and obstructing charges and why? And you just stated that it's young black men. Is that for Kalamazoo County as a whole?
I mean, I wouldn't say just for Kalamazoo County.
We're speaking on just Kalamazoo County.
Okay.
Who would be, I guess, the group of people that?
Oh yes, I would say because it only targeted in certain communities where they jumping out like that. It's not the whole Kalamazoo where they actually, I can ride around town and they're gonna jump out me like that. It's targeted. It's targeted areas. So sometimes some of these children is brought up in these areas. Does not make them a bad person. You know, that's a product of their environment. You know, but they're not doing this everywhere in Kalamazoo.
I would add to that. I think that you see it a lot with KPDS police stops and RNLs for there. The other place we see it a lot, just so you all can understand, is we see it a lot. If they can attach an RNO to a domestic violence case, they often try to do that because, as most of you know, domestic violence cases oftentimes lose a cooperating witness. The person that alleged domestic violence at the beginning has changed their mind, but they want to hold these people accountable, and so they attach an RNO that goes along with that. And so we see it a lot, and it says a lot, I think, about our society where If you think about domestic violence, one of those most intimate kind of assaults of somebody that is very close and cared for by you is a 93-day misdemeanor. And tightening your muscles while somebody's putting you in handcuffs is a 2-year felony. It talks about where our priorities have been, who has the strength to do who has the strong lobby, right? And it really is about making sure that law changes. But
Kind of building off of what Matt just said, the other thing I think that we see a lot is whether someone has a gun or not. Do you all know what the felony firearm charge is? Yeah, so it's a charge where if there is a gun attached in any way to a felony, it's a mandatory 2 years in prison preceding any other sentence that someone can get. So I often too in my practice see a lot of times whether someone's got a gun that's legal or not at that time, if they're committing some other felony, if the officer's giving consent command, they're not. That's another way to try and add that charge as well.
So the other thing we see a lot of is RNOs involving incidents that would have no other charge, right? Their interactions with the police that would not have led to any other charge. It's not a situation where RNOs are added to another crime. It's literally the interaction with the police is the thing that's causing the felony, right? Now I'll talk about a little bit more, but that's something that has to change. And part of it is I think relatively small part of this is talking to the community like this. And a big part of this is how are we sending out people that are supposed to protect and serve, and they're causing felonies by their presence in a situation. And we see this. We see this where literally groups of people are standing around, and one person is getting roughed up by the police, and we see 5, 6 RNOs come up by friends and saying, "Stop doing this," because they feel, rightly so, that the police are acting this way. And the other thing is how many young men, their first felony is an RNO, and how often that puts that young man in the crosshairs for more involvement with the police, either through probation or just being targeted more often. And I tell my clients, you get an RNO, and especially if you beat it, you better be careful because you're going to get picked up more. Just straight up. And so that's a big thing we have here is just like how often it's just that interaction. It's just being close to the police and talking to them that leads you to have a felony to commit no other crime. So,
Can body cam or bystander footage help or hurt these cases?
sorry.
yeah,
So right now we're in the process of doing a project called the RNO project in our office. And the best thing about RNOs is they all happen around police officers. And if they have body cams, you talk about how when it's in writing, it sounds different. Well, we're finding that a lot of those police reports in writing aren't actually what shows on the video. And we're systematically going through all the RNOs in our community, comparing those to the videos to the police reports, and we're showing that what they're saying is happening more often than not isn't really happening. So that obviously gives us a tool to fight the charges. Sometimes we can win the charges, we can win cases really early with these charges because we can see the video. But it also gives us ammunition and evidence to show that the way it's going on right now isn't working. And that the change has to come. I'll just tell you, people's got to stop, resisting, right? That's one thing. They got to show ideas and everything like that. That's just such a small part. Cops got to stop messing with people. They got to stop coming up on people and laying hands. They got to stop making up stories about RNOs that don't exist. They have to stop pushing people to do stuff to act violently back to them. They have to stop, saying, I had prosecutors the other day tell me that she advises officers when they're putting people under arrest to say stop resisting, even if they're not resisting. Why? Because the video shows them saying stop resisting, even though they're not resisting, right? We have to change that policy. We have to.
So is that something that I want to put together and discuss with KPS?
Okay, that's the whole point of it. We can talk about that later. The whole point of it is the number 1, 2, and 3 options of that thing is not based on telling the community what to do. It's changing what the police in our county do. That's the purpose.
And that's great.
Yes.
Sorry. Just to stay on track, just to make sure, if you have any questions, if you could please write them down on the sticky note. Just so we can make sure we get through the entire list. What policies would help reduce misuse or overcharging? So if you could think of any policies that you would like to implement here and within Kalamazoo County to help reduce these charges, the misuse or overcharging of these charges, what would they be?
I'll do the first one and I'll pass it down, is that require every officer have a body cam in use whenever they interact with anybody. And the other thing that we see is require them to save that video. Right now, they're not required to save the video past 90 days. And sometimes charges aren't brought for much longer. That one policy would change a lot of things. And then there's a bunch of other stuff.
Is this a statewide policy or just a policy here in the county?
Well, it's different because the Michigan, the state people provide the video at charging. They always have a video. It's a local thing, essentially.
The one policy I would add, and the prosecutor would hate me, but I think the prosecutor, before they issue any resisting and obstructing charge, should watch the video. I don't think they should rely on the police report anymore. I think they should actually watch that video before they decide what they're going to do.
That's the biggest, our biggest thing right there is, because it's never gonna match up with the paperwork of actually what happened. So is we actually basically, my thing is this, the officers need to be trained. That's it. At the end of the day, we act like it's on the community, it's on the people. Everybody is different. So you have to be trained how to deal with people. So all of this is coming about because you're not trained how to deal with people. If you can talk to a person, that might not escalate to no R&O. But if you talk to a person crazy, people feel like you have to understand, in our communities, we don't know our rights. You know, we don't know our rights, but as a human being, I know if you're being disrespectful, and I know I can say whatever I want, I got freedom to speak. You know, so if you're doing that, y'all just escalate that thing, and then you're gonna make a command, and then you disobey it, because you're already in a heated argument. So why am I I'm gonna obey you when I'm already in a heated argument with you? So he's not trained how to deal with me. So automatically he's gonna charge me. So these are the things that's going on in our community that we try to change.
Yeah. So one of the things right now, we don't see any evidence of officers getting into any trouble for repeatedly making false statements in their police reports. That's one of the things we want to do is show evidence of that. We also, would it make sense that the officers, have a training that they're supposed to de-escalate things, and if the officer escalates things instead, they get talked to? There's no method where that policy is implemented. That's the idea of what we want to change.
One question that someone just wrote down was, can we hold KVET to keep videos on also? I guess this is very
What did you say?
Can we hold KVET to keep videos on also? This is during body cam footage, during the arrest. During interaction.
So yeah, that would be my policy is that they have to turn on their videos and not use this excuse where like, oh, it might show some confidential source or something like that. It's all BS. I mean, they had a policy for a while, a written policy, where they turned off all their videos before they went into a house. They turned off their camera, or they don't even wear them. So, I mean, that's number one step would be they have to wear them, they have to keep them, and they have to be on them. So.
Another question was, from a community member, was about who is responsible, I guess, who is responsible for police, so who oversees our police departments?
That would be their city government that is responsible, so maybe that's would be the city council. The subject townships, township authority, sheriff is obviously the elected position, so the sheriff is the sheriff. The prosecutor is considered the chief law enforcement official of the county, and a lot of policies flow from there, or are not stopped because of that. I think that's part of it. I think you can see other counties in Michigan that have more progressive prosecutors, that they are trying to find ways to get at this issue. And it would be nice if we had a more open dialogue. Some of you guys were here last year. I believe our county prosecutor's office tries to, and if you listen to their rhetoric, say that they charge misdemeanors, and they don't think there's any, actual physical resistance, so if it's just walking away or something like that. But again, I think all of the attorneys who work in our office could provide examples where that isn't how they actually charge it. And even if it's charged as a misdemeanor, it doesn't mean that that's how it's going to interact on a criminal record. So there's a lot of issues with that. So.
What trainings do officers receive in regards to interacting with the community? And this goes hand in hand with another community question about the qualifications for our police officers now only needing to receive a high school diploma, but what proper trainings would benefit the community?
I don't know all of the trainings. I know that all of the officers who carry a weapon are MPOL certified, which is a very, it's a process that all of them have to go through that includes classwork, physical work, test taking. The reality is, though, you're putting what I see, a lot of young men and women who don't have a lot of exposure to what the world is really like on the streets at a young age. And when you start as an officer, you start on the road, so you interact with people without really the toolbox to do it. If you all think about who you were when you were 22, 23 versus you're fortunate enough to be in your 40s like me, I think 23-year-old you would fail compared to what I know now. So a real honest policy where we find ways to enlighten them about community members and how their policing can help or hurt. And the tough part is the wall of silence, right? I mean, the officers know who the good officers are, and a lot of times they know who the bad officers are. But I can tell you nobody's actively come to us and pointed out bad officers.
I think the short answer to that too is what training you're going to see is not enough. The short answer to what training they receive is not enough. And I think part of the question asked what training should they receive, and I think clearly diversity training, right? Like how to interact with different people. I think in general there's a lot more white officers than officers of color. I think that some training on how to interact with people that don't look like that would truly benefit, especially in our community.
I would say it's done a lot better in other places, right? It's not something that exists uniformly across the country that it's done this way, right? So it's not like asking the officers to do an impossible thing, right? There's policies, there's a way to do it, but I'll just tell you right now, there's no incentive. And what has to be done is attention has to be brought to it in a systematic manner to show how often this stuff happens, how often they're rolling up on you and doing stuff like that, so that we make this change.
the biggest thing in our community that, as far as knowledge-wise, that the police officers actually know that what they're doing with the R&O charges. You know, it's not actually like that you actually doing something, because they're gonna overcharge you to make you actually take a plea out. You know, so this is what they're actually doing to our community, is overcharge because of the lack of knowledge. And this is what we're here for, to actually show them, to actually let them know, like, you cannot just, you all have the knowledge. It ain't like you don't know what you're doing. Okay, you didn't do this didn't happen, but you're gonna get caught with an R&O, because I can show that you actually told me no. You know, so you overcharge certain things just because I told you no, and it's an R&O. But you actually come in our community, the public, to serve us, you know, to correct when something is going wrong. But y'all is punishing people for actually telling you no. And that's not an actual felony. You want to charge my child with a felony for telling you no, when you're supposed to be trying to correct them. You know, so that's what goes on. That's the lack of training in our community. And they must. I don't care, you cannot put nobody on the street that had no training dealing with mental health. Because this is what you're running into in our community. It's mental health. So how is people trained, if you're not trained to deal with the people that you're coming to serve? A lot of our family has trauma and they deal with mental health daily. But these are the things that go unnoticed because we're dealing with a charge. You know, so yes, they have to have that proper training. They must do these type of things because we're actually asking for these things in our community.
Okay, hi, I'm Rhonda. I kind of agree with him because I'm an advocate for the homeless. I've been feeding them and clothing them, and it is about mental state. It's about stigma. It ain't about whether it's the police or whether it's somebody they want to charge. It's about how you say things to people. And yes, if we have to have police officers and us, like, maybe they should do some meetings where the people can come in and see how they get retrained and what they do. I think that would be a great thing. It would be less violence if we sing how we interact with each other. Because it is. It ain't about what you say. It's about how you say things to people. Like for example, I was born in the 50s. See, today I can say no sir and no ma'am. But when somebody do this like body gesture, yeah, I don't have to act like that because you do a body gesture just because you got a position. You know what I'm saying? So it's about how we say things to each other and respond and say yes ma'am. See, I can say yes ma'am, no sir, but I don't have to go, like that, like body gesture. You know what I mean? So it's really important, like when the police is out there and then they come back, because like I said, I work with a lot of the homeless people and feed them. They got a whole lot of mental illness. But because of the love that I want to give to them, they understand a lot more better. So it's about how we say things to each other.
I think at the heart of it is human dignity, right? And making sure that every interaction respects human dignity and gives people a presence so they're seen. You're so right about that.
Our next question actually goes along with this topic. For mental health, if a person has a mental health issue and gets an R&O, is this charge dismissed if found the person is neurodiverse?
It depends. That's the reality. There are some cases that the attorneys are able to work out resolutions. There's other ones where they will, the prosecutor's office will double down, especially if it's somebody that is a common problem. From law enforcement's perspective, they don't, in that sense, recognize the humanity of the mental health crisis that's going on. Our office tries to litigate as hard as we can on those cases because it really is, right? So one of the other parts that we haven't talked about, we've talked a lot about fact that you have to do some action to resist or obstruct, but you also have to know that the person that you're resisting or obstructing is a law enforcement officer and is, actively doing their duties. And I think a lot of times that people are in a mental health break, they don't fully appreciate that information. So that's my point.
How many police, this comes from my community member, how many police departments are there in Kalamazoo County?
Sheriff's Office, 11. So you have the Sheriff's Department, you have Michigan State Police, you have KDPS, Portage, Township of Kalamazoo, Galesburg, Vicksburg, Schoolcraft, Richland,
And continuing with that, do you see a significant difference between any of these departments in the way that we are doing community policing?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Do you see a significant difference between any of these departments in the way that we are currently doing community policing, or any suggestions to do a better job that would be able to help the community?
Yeah, I think the reality is that especially when you look at KDPS, it is a very big organization, and it's come out a little bit tonight in this that I think that there's one issue with the average road officer that's out there doing their work and those type of RNOs versus the other ones that we see that are through their KVET unit, which is this enhanced, what I would call cowboy unit that just thinks that they can do what they want, and they are very aggressive in what they do. And I think they believe deeply that they are on the side of right. And I think there's a number of defenders in here tonight that are on the front lines. I'm not on the front lines anymore. But they just see these atrocities that KVET does. And it's sometimes very scary. Mark talked a little bit about laying hands on people. It's one thing if somebody that's in uniform touches you. But the number of undercover officers that walk up to a human being and put their hands on them, I don't know how you distinguish, other than, we have the typical what a KVET officer looks like. If you're a defender, you can pick them out in a prelim exam courtroom. But the reality is most citizens don't know what they're getting at when somebody just runs up on them. But I would tell you, if I was ever confronted by, vans pulling up at me, I would have a legitimate fear for my life, and I think that that's the part that is never taken into account in these type of cases.
What advice would you give to someone in the community if they or a loved one is charged with an RNO? What steps should they take?
So I will pass this in a minute, but before I left tonight, I had printed this off. This for me is something that I wish I could convince everybody to learn and try to practice. It is the 25 words that we all wish individuals would say to law enforcement when they interacted with them. First would start, this is if you're in a car. Why did you pull me over? I have not discussed my day. Am I being detained or am I free to go? And if they tell you that you're not free to go, just simply say, I invoke the Fifth Amendment, and stop talking. And that means stop talking. So they can say, where are you coming from? You don't answer. The reality is, in a situation like that, you're going to greatly cut down on what they can use to charge you. Now, the worst part about this is it does not prevent you from getting arrested. And the sad reality is, like I said earlier, if an officer has an intent to arrest you, you are not going to talk yourself out of it. You understand, police are allowed to lie to people that they are investigating. So they will lie to you. I'll help you out if you just tell me what you need. I'll get you out of here and get you home. That's a lie.
Into our panel discussion with Jeff. So the first question is, Can you walk us through what happened during your arrest and what you believe contributed to the R&O charge being filed?
Well, I was sitting in front of my sister's house. And it says, I seen a car pull, turn the corner with lights on, and I jumped out. And come to find out, at the end of the day, I found out it was gay bed. And I called R&O. That's all.
Looking back on your experience, what do you wish you had known in the moment that might have changed how things unfolded?
If I would have knew that it was the police. You know, that's the only thing that happened. Like, that's the change of the experience, you know. Because if you know that they're the police, I mean, why would you get up and run? But if you figuring that you accustomed to shootings that happen over here, you know, I sit out here and I fight gun violence on the regular. So I see multiple shootings that happen. I just witnessed a guy getting killed over there. So, you know, in broad daylight at 12 o'clock, you know, by a stray bullet, and it wasn't intended for him. So these types of things is not uncommon in this neighborhood. And a lot of times that's what we must have. That's one thing that we have to do, is have people picture what's going on instead of somebody just telling you. You have to know what type of neighborhood you live in, where you at, what's going on, so people can understand, so they can see these types of things is not uncommon here.
What advice would you give to someone who finds himself in a stressful encounter with law enforcement to avoid escalating the situation?
My understanding and dealing with the community is more or less knowing what an R&O is. Who's going to actually take the time to know what an R&O is when you're actually talking to them? You know, so that's one of the things. It's more like teaching them. You have to teach somebody something that's becoming an epidemic. So I feel like R&O have to be taught. It don't have to be something that have to be spoken about, because a lot of people are going to perceive it differently. So I will put this because it's becoming an epidemic and we know we're being overcharged. Because a lot of times they're gonna add 2, 3, or 4, you know, as you go on to the courthouse. You know, and it's gonna, all that happened is, oh, this officer was involved, that officer was involved. The only thing y'all did was handcuff a person. You know, so he resisted all of y'all through one handcuff. You know, so those are the overcharges that nobody speaks about, you know. So that is what we want to do. We have to be taught so a person can follow the command, you know. But how can you follow a command if you not know if it's an officer or not? So those are the things that we deal with in the court system. But we make a change by our voices with the court system. But we have to share our knowledge and teach everybody in our community or just a friend of what an R&O is, and that it's a possibility that you, your loved one, your friend or family will be affected by this just by a traffic stop.
As a community advocate and a community member here in Kalamazoo County, what do you think needs to change at the policy or training level to reduce unnecessary R&O charges?
It's training. It's training, because as you get training, you start to get practice. You know, as you come out into the community, you start to be able to, now you can engage in kind of a conversation instead of bullying somebody. You know, because the bully tactics don't work. This is what we have to understand. We have to change with what's going on in our environment. We have to understand that a lot of the adolescents don't even listen to their parents. Who do they run and listen to? They listen to the guys on the street. So you have this, like with the guys on the street, you have to be trained to, so you want to attract them, to get them to understand. Other than that, just, if you bullying them, they're gonna push back. Trust me, I understand this. And this is where the gun violence is getting out of control. This is what makes the officers really scared to come through the community, to make it bad. They only come when something happens. That's not what you're trained to do. Y'all supposed to come and interact with the community so you know what's going on in the community. So you can have that free range where with somebody going wrong, they can't call on you instead of being scared and just shooting somebody because they're scared.
So this is a How can we better prepare our young people, especially in our older police communities, to navigate police encounters safely? From a community advocate's perspective and also a legal perspective.
Yeah, so I think you said young people. I want to shout out the young man who's been here this whole time. I think that's great. He's been in the front row, he's back there now, and I think educating young people is so important. So I think something we can do is try to get in the school and have more events like this, which I think Matt is trying to do as our executive director at KCBI. But I definitely didn't want this day to go by without shouting out that young man who's here learning and absorbing all of this.
So as we close this panel, Marky has something. Go ahead.
Here's what I think, obviously, that question is how the community can react better. I would just say, it sounds simple, the stuff Matt was saying, don't try to argue with them and everything like that. That's what, but I think, add on to the training thing, there has to be repercussions when officers do stuff that mess with people. That just has to be. We can have as much training as we want, but if the officers don't get in trouble for violating their training, because they have training right now. Well, we did a study, we looked through all the training and all of it in the entire county. We have it all listed down. They violate their training every day, right? There are no repercussions, and the community has to force our elected officials to establish policy that if that policy is broken, there are repercussions. Because we have officers who do this. We have officers we know immediately when we see them on a police report that they are most likely lying on that police report, and there are no repercussions. So that's, I really appreciate this thing, like teaching the community, like this is what to do. I think that's one step, but really we have to figure out a way to force our law enforcement agencies to comply with basic human rights and follow this stuff. Because otherwise, they're literally, people get promotions who are the worst. And we have no way to do it. And then but right now there is no real accountability in our police force unless we can find them doing something completely illegal.
Our last question, this is our last question for the panel. Before we move on to our next activity, what gives you hope that we can build safer, more informed interactions between the public and police officers? Anything at all?
Yeah, I know that this will sound a little pie in the sky, but I still am optimistic. The work that CCJT is doing, we have some representatives from ALPAC. One of the things that has to happen is we have to find a way to have law enforcement hear what's being said in these types of things. Because the experience of the citizens of Kalamazoo is different than what happens in City Hall as far as what the officers experience. And I think the more that we can have honest discussions, that we can push politicians to do the right thing, that we can come together as a community to call out the bad actions that we see. It's important because doing nothing isn't an option. It's how do we find incremental success until we can really overturn big systemic injustice. Ours is a big systemic injustice.
It's our voice, you know. Our voice is what matters when we trying to change a situation. And unity. We have to unify. This is a county. We have to understand that this is in the database. It doesn't lie. You know, it's easy for us to look up and see how many actual people was charged in Kalamazoo County within RNO. You know, just to make it believe. You know, how can every charge be attached within RNO? You know, come on, like, those are the things that's actually, we can actually show. So if we actually stand up and unify and speak about this and take it, because it counts on us as a community. to actually go and push, because our community is actually the ones being affected by it. Everybody that you can actually know that ever been a part of this criminal justice system in these last 10 years have an R&O attached to it. You know, and we understand, I know when before I went to prison, it was what, fleeing and eluding. You jump out, task force or anybody, you jump out in the community, they didn't write that. Because they chasing you, they is the enforcers. You know, they didn't, like they just pulled you over and doing an actual traffic stop. So this is why I don't understand, like K-Fed, if you being a bully, if you get that push back, why you powering out and writing the R&O? Because you're not following the law to get an R&O. You know, so those are the things. If you're doing a proper traffic stop and you actually, and this person is being belligerent and not following law, then that's an R&O. But if you actually jumping out and bullying a person, and a person resists you in some sort or form or fashion because of the way you approach them and ganged up on them, you cannot cower it out, because that's what I call it. You can't cower it out now and just be like, well, we're going to write it on our R&O. No, let it be, because you jumped out like that. Y'all didn't come as in your full attire. Y'all coming in mask. Come in your full attire. And then if a person resists you, then like that. But don't jump out in mask and scare a person and then write that.